Battery Day, he said, if I remember correctly, 100 gigawatt hours of internal cell production by 2022, and they will be at capacity 200 gigawatt hours by the end of 22. Now, do you think he's on track for that?
It depends on how you interpret it. I think, I have it written down somewhere.
Is there any other way of interpreting? Can he produce 100 gigawatt hours cells internally next year?
Welcome back to Rockstock Channel, and thanks for checking in. Before we launch into the interview, we'd like to thank all our Patreon sponsors. And for those of you who are new, share a bit about us. RK Equity is an advisory firm run by Rodney Hooper and me, Howard Klein. We are exclusively focused on raising awareness about companies producing or developing the next generation critical raw materials that are powering Tesla's EV battery energy transition. Please register your email at rkequity.com and follow Rodney and me on LinkedIn and Twitter. Please also subscribe to this channel, Rockstock Channel, on YouTube, as well as Lithium Ion Rocks on SoundCloud for our podcasts. Please note, Rodney and me are not financial advisors or broker-dealers. Nothing you hear in this video is investment advice. Please do your own research and read the disclaimer at the end of this video or on our website. Thanks again for the support, and let's get into the video.
You know, it's something we've been saying for some time at RK Equity. You know, US is the sleeping giant, and we're about to have, even before this latest Biden proposals are coming through, just the number of new models into the key sectors, which is SUV and pickup truck. It just, you know, simply a question of choice. Now, I mean, I'm hearing even talk about possibly a $10,000 federal credit, never mind a $7,500. And possibly no cap on sales on that. So, you know, I've raised the issue is it's not about sales, it's about cells. In China, they sell these dinky mini EVs that have got like 10 kilowatt hour battery packs. And in the US, you've got Rivian and Hummers and, you know, all of these things on 100, you know, 100, 135, even higher. I mean, 200, I mean, the Bollinger all-wheel or something is 403 kilowatt hours. So I'm saying, by 2025, it's not inconceivable that the US will deploy more battery cells, gigawatt hours, than China in the EV market. It sounds ludicrous from last year's data, but looking at the number of models coming through, look what could happen with the credit, and look what, you know, the size, just the sheer size and difference in battery packs in what's being sold. So the US to have, I guess, smarter supply chains, starting from the cell all the way back through to mines. And then what you're saying, you know, you've got a fractured market, but if you're going to be relying a lot more on energy as to sustain transportation, you're going to need to have some smarter thinking on that side as well. You can't just have peak power at midday in the sun and then, you know, nothing in the evening.
Well, one thing I've been thinking about a lot lately is what it's going to take to move the obstacles out of EV makers' ways. Like, for instance, Tesla. It looks like we're going to hit a serious material bottleneck in the next few years on about every material that goes into batteries. And I have a feeling when that happens, and it's going to be happening exactly at the time that EVs are starting to gain a lot of popularity and traction in the US. And I think once that happens, I think regulators, or I hope regulators, jump in and they start doing some serious thinking about this, and they start moving regulations out of the way.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, to me, one thing I find interesting is I think by the time Biden's term ends, EVs will be as cheap, if not cheaper, than internal combustion engines. So regardless of what happens in the next elections, EVs are in full swing.
Yeah.
Now I guess you've raised a good point. Just as a news flash, lithium is already in short supply, even though we're at 4% EV penetration. I don't know if you've been watching the prices. We've said this, and now of course we've got models. You cannot scale commodities at 50 to 60% compound rates like you can EV cells. It doesn't. Obviously, the total market doesn't compound, but the total market of lithium and nickel and graphite and all of these things is sort of growing at 25% plus, and you can't scale production at that rate. So you need to make the call. It'll be interesting to see if, because I understand at the micro level that people sort of dispute and don't want a project built, etc. But what I don't understand is if you look holistically at the whole globe and saying, if we are to make this as a universe of people, you should develop the lowest, lowest environmental impact, lowest CO2 project should be developed. And it might happen to be the one that you're disputing, but you don't care if they build it in China because you don't live in China. And I'm not sure I understand that logic. Or some other part in Asia, or nickel deposits in Indonesia where they want to put tailings on the seabed and you've got to fight it. Should we be approaching this whole clean energy revolution from a holistic perspective as a universe of people? And to my mind, that's what you should be doing.
Yeah, I agree. We're currently paying for, for lack of a better term, the sins of the father. We had Henry Ford 100 years ago, and he put this whole thing in motion with oil, or he was a big part of it. There are other parts of it, of course, but now we have to make amends for that. And not only do we have to get all these battery electric vehicles on the road, which limit the amount of CO2 going into the air, but we also have to make sure that the materials that go into those come from clean supply chains as well. So I'm totally on board with you. And I guess to put a finer point on what I was saying a moment ago is I don't see how these EV credits help. The issue is with supply. So what we need to do is we need to cut the red tape for these mines. And I think the mines that are going to be in the US and North America are going to be much cleaner and much better in terms of CO2 than the stuff we get from China. So we should help clear the way for them.
That is exactly, my thoughts, and it's why, Howard and I are pro Canada and Quebec. You've got a clean source of energy there. It's cheap and it's clean. So to my mind, a logical supplier to the North American, but read as US, is Canada, and especially out of Quebec. So I'll be interested to see how that evolves. We've had some stops and starts on a couple of projects, but those have been financial. It's not on the merits of how clean are they. And it's, I guess, why I raised that, Nuvemond, Tolga, these guys can produce CO2 neutral, why, it's logical as long as it's priced right. They make sense as projects, and there are lithium projects that we also like up there. And I guess nickel, if it can be done at a commercial price, same thing again. If you've got a natural, easy access to low-cost power, then you need mitigating factors, because I do understand the sort of skeptics or the people who push back, and bi-directional, on the battery to charge and discharge into the grid or what have you. If you can make a phenomenal battery that's got a long, high cycle life and long life, you're never going to use 1 million kilometers on your car, I don't think. So if you could produce a low or very close to zero CO2 cell, and you can charge it and then discharge it into the grid or your house, then that to me is a great answer.
Oh yeah, I love the idea, but I just don't know enough about how the grid works in order to make that happen. I think batteries are at a place where they have high enough cycle life and they're cheap enough to make it viable. I do know that Europe is more well set up for vehicle to grid, and I really want to see it in the US. I mean, personally, I have a Cybertruck on order, and I know that thing's going to have like a 220 volt outlet, and I'm looking forward to having that as like backup power when I go back to the US, because in the Midwest, every summer your basement floods because the power goes out. And the sump pump doesn't have any power to pump out of your basement. So yeah,
you've touched on something there now. To my mind, I think the Cybertruck's going to be a huge hit. I think that's going to have a million or pre-orders by the time it actually rolls off the line. But we've already seen Elon Musk saying Semi and he hasn't said Cyber, but the Semi, there's a cell shortage. That's again the limiting factor already. And again, we're talking about it with how many what EV penetration are we already talking about cells? And when you say cells, you can read through to battery raw materials is really, going to be coming the pinch point. So when do you think that, the Cyber is going to come online in the Semi, and how are they going to fix this?
There's a lot of moving parts here. I'm going to search my memory banks here and see if I can give an idea of the way that I think things are going to play out. So they're probably Tesla at their Cato Road facility. I think they're either on the final iteration of the 4680 battery line or the penultimate version. So I think very soon they're going to have the final version of their battery cell line. I don't think Tesla is going to copy that line at Cato Road until they have it working just exactly how they want it to work. Now, I think hopefully they should be starting to hit decent yield rates now. So maybe, I don't know, by mid-year this year, they'll be at like 50% yield rate and putting out 5 gigawatt hours of batteries cells per year. And then maybe by the end of the year, they'll get that yield rate up to 10 gigawatt hours. Because after you've finalized that design for your cell line, it takes about 6 months to get it, 6 months to a year to get that fully ramped. So I expect that's going to be plenty of cells for the Model Y, and any overflow, I think they're going to use that for like the Semi. And then once we get into next year, I think that's finally when the battery production facility will be built at Giga Berlin. And I think that's going to be their first full-scale production facility. I expect them to break ground and start building that facility the second half of this year, and then they're going to start ramping it next year. So as they start ramping that line in Giga Berlin, say about a year from now, Cato Road can be redirected. Those cells can be redirected for the Semi, the Tesla Roadster, and Cybertruck. So yeah, as I was saying, I think they'll have more than enough cells that they need early in the Model Y ramp. And I think those are going to go to the Cybertruck. So I think late at the end of this year, we'll see the Cybertruck start ramping. So it's kind of, they have all these different ramps that are going at the same time, and they have to feather their cell production to make sure that they can supply enough cells for those ramps. So I got into a lot of detail there, but hopefully
not at all, because it is a hell of a thing. You're trying to bring the Semi and the Cyber on at the same time, and they both need high nickel 4680 cells.
Yeah.
If it's going to make sense and you're going to make money out of it commercially. So it is quite a thing. And lest we forget, Battery Day, he said, if I remember correctly, 100 gigawatt hours of internal cell production by 2022, and they will be at capacity 200 gigawatt hours by the end of 22. Now, you think he's on track for that?
It depends on how you interpret it. I think, I have it written down somewhere.
Is there any other way of interpreting? Can he produce 100 gigawatt hours cells internally next year?
Well, no, I don't think they can. I think that's going to be the run rate that they're at the end of the year. I think they're probably going to produce something closer to 50 or 60 gigawatt hours for the entire company for 2022. And that's not. And
let's just be clear, for those that think, taking a skeptic view of the techno king of Tesla, to even get to 50 to 60 gigawatt hours is a hell of an achievement, let me tell you.
Yeah. I'm not trying to piss on anybody's dreams here. It's just
no. I'm saying from my side, I'm teasing, but that would be in my mind would be a phenomenal result as it is.
Yeah. Well, I feel like saying that I've become kind of a Tesla bear, and it's like, no, this is like 60 gigawatt hours in 2022 is absolutely amazing. That's nothing to scoff at. That's enough for what? 800,000 vehicles, something like that. So,
well, it depends on the size of those bad boys, because obviously Semi is going to choose. I don't know what you're estimating as kilowatt hour capacity. I thought it was going to be slightly bigger, but I think the short range about 500 and the longer range drifts I guess, to 600 or 700. I originally thought it might be 800, and the Cybertruck surely will not be coming in under 100.
Yes, the Cybertruck, I think it depends on, funnily enough, it depends on what kind of tires you put on the Cybertruck. Because if they're off-road inefficient tires, you're going to get very different mileage than you would out of on-road tires. I think it's going to be on-road tires. There's a channel that did a great analysis on it called NXT Garage. So I would go with their on-road tires that they use for that estimate. And he was looking at 180 kilowatt hours for the triple motor long range version. And I forget what the lesser ones was. I think it was something like 85 to 90 kilowatt hours for the 250 mile version with the rear wheel drive motor. And then the dual motor was somewhere in between there. What I've been thinking about the last couple of days is, as Tesla hits this cell constraint or raw materials constraint, which I think they will between 24 and 2026, based on what I've seen of like benchmark minerals and what have you, I think a lot of the way that they're going to deal with that is by ramping the Model 2, which will probably have like, I don't know, a 50 or a 60 kilowatt hour battery pack. So they should be able to get more vehicles out of the same number of cells.
Yeah, look, I think it will be interesting. So, you know, obviously we know the benchmark guys well. We take a different interpretation. They sort of show the aggregate level. As far as from where I'm sitting, Jordan, you're going to have a structural deficit in lithium by next year. You're going to be short. So supply demand total looks okay. But when you pass it down to strip out all the industrial supply, so grease, ceramics, etc., take that lithium supply out, and then take well-established battery supply chains like LCO for your phones and your laptops, take that out. Take all those long-term contracts out and strip it out. Then strip out all the off-spec material that doesn't qualify into the battery supply chain, strip that out. Then when you're left with what you see, what you're left with, you've got yourself a problem. Now, that's why Tesla's looking to produce internally. I know they've got teams on clay and all of those good things. That's great. If you look at the graphite side as well, that's also going to look tight. Look, it depends on what you look at. And again, you can't just flip and say, oh, well, I'll go to LFP, because LFP in the end also needs carbonate. It's still going to need battery grade material to go in it, and it's going to need graphite to go in it. So we'll see. I do think, I've always said, the beauty for Tesla is they started out as an all-electric company. So it's not optional to figure out how you're going to get your raw materials. You either have them or you don't have a product. A lot of the traditional OEMs, when EVs were 1%, 2%, it was a sideshow bob. It was a fringe thing. You leave it to your cell suppliers to say, guys, that's what I need and take care of it. And they tried that for a long time. Now, of course, that doesn't pan. So now you have to rethink. We think there are a number of EV producers that are going to come up who don't have term contracts and don't have their raw materials and are reliant on third parties that are going to come up short. You can see who's taking EV seriously because they have secured, they have gone out, they have done term contracts on key materials, and they have done term contracts with battery cell suppliers that we would consider genuine tier one suppliers, that some of those have done the offtake agreements on behalf of, I guess, their customers. But there are a lot of the other sort of, lesser sized operators and EV manufacturers that we think are going to be caught out. Possibly a couple of the bigger names too, we'll see. But then in China, where you have 475 EV makers that go into the spot market and do the lastminute.com supply chains and run it fast and loose because they don't have the balance sheet. I think, like in the past, in the internal combustion era, there were casualties. I think it's realistically, we have to see some casualties in the EV space because there are just too many names. If you bottom up all of the estimated sales, it's not possible.
Yeah, it doesn't take much to sink a company once it's starting to teeter. It was, I think, last year ago, I had a conversation with Yvonne from EV Stock Channel, and it seemed to me that the company that was most likely to pull through it was Volkswagen. Even them, I suggested that they might require some sort of bailout from the government because VW, I think in Germany is, or in Europe in general, is kind of too big to fail, and they wouldn't let that company fail. But a lot of the other companies, I don't see them making it, because it's going to be musical chairs with raw materials, and there's not going to be enough chairs when everybody sits down. There's going to be some people that are left out, and they don't have what they need to make batteries. And the further it's like when you're driving a car or a motorbike real fast, the further that you can look down, further that you can look ahead, the less likely you are to hit something or wreck. And it's the same way with strategic planning for raw materials. Tesla has the furthest line of sight of all the major automakers. VW at their Power Day, they said they're going to bring cell production in house, but it didn't look like they were looking at raw materials at all. And that's where everything's at. That's where everything's going to be for between 2023 and 2026, or even starting this year, as you said.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. So we always joke and say, if you look at all of the listings in the US, that possibly, Wall Street is suffering from premature e-speculation, as you had all of these, EV companies coming onto the market, and now some of them are already paring back their forecast because they're saying they don't have supply now. So some of them don't have battery cell supply, and so on. And that's why I've said we did some research for a couple of companies last year in terms of the bottom up versus what was available, and the bottom up totals of estimated EV sales is just not physically possible in the raw material space. And we said it from quite a while back, and people have been in denial. They've had their head and saying, no, not us, but as I say, based on our maths, not looking at aggregated supply demand, which is what you see from some forecasters, we'll pare it down to battery level. And I think from next year, the alarm sirens are going to be going off, and it'll be very interesting to see what happens with all of these, would-be SPACs that have raised a lot of money, how they're going to sort of live up to forecast.
Yeah. And I want to go back on touch on something that you mentioned. You were talking about LFP a moment ago and earlier in the video. And in terms of graphite, a lot of people are concerned that because silicon is hitting the market, that it's going to eliminate the need for graphite. Now, you gave one counter argument against that. It's, we might actually see increased demand in batteries because
it's an enabler. To me,
yeah.
It's the enabler.
Yeah, but the one thing I'd like to add to that is lithium iron phosphate. I don't think they're going to be putting much silicon in those batteries, because LFP, its biggest strength is its cost and its cycle life. And I think the more silicon that you add to it, the less utility you're going to get out of those LFP batteries. So I think LFP is going to be an absolutely massive chunk of the market deeper into the 2020s. And I think it's going to be using pure graphite anodes. I still need to do a deep dive on LFP because I do have some concerns about the cold weather charging performance. I don't know if it's something particular to CATL.
But with that said, Jordan, the one thing, so we're a hydroxide guys, we've sort of pushed, but that is on the performance EVs, which we think still have a long way to go, specifically in the US and in Europe, and possibly even into aviation as one goes, the high nickel light batteries, but I am pro LFP in terms of the energy storage and so on. So from that perspective, if you're talking $60 to $80 per kilowatt hour at the pack level, you can electrify almost anything. And that's where I see renewables with energy storage as a huge market for LFP. And speaking to our guys, they agree with you in terms of look at what goes graphite wise goes into LFP. And it's exactly what you're saying. The key element to it, charge and discharge from a renewables backup perspective, you want cycle life.
Yeah. So it's I think the future is bright for graphite, and I've had quite a few discussions with people online. There's a lot of hype around silicon. There's quite a few people that thought Tesla unveiled a pure silicon anode at Battery Day, but
Yeah,
it's just not the case. That's years down the road, if not later this decade or early next decade.
But think about it, Jordan. What performance can you get out of increasing the silicon doping from 6% or whatever it is, or around 10 to 15 to 20? It does phenomenal things.
Yeah.
I don't think people understand how good the battery is going to be at 15 to 20.
Yeah, you're going to get fast charging. Is going to be, besides the higher energy density, you're going to get fast charging capability with high silicon. So I think people are going to be surprised what a dash of silicon can do.
And that's my point, is it's the enabler. Everyone said, they misread that thing. What we're saying, and what the guys we speak to in the graphite world are saying is, no, putting that extra bit of silicon in is going to, if anything, is going to secure the future of graphite. It's going to expand the market of graphite, because A, is cheap to put the silicon in, and the performance is phenomenal. So I'm very much looking to see how that adjustment improves the market share for graphite. And
Yeah,
I agree with you on the LFP. You make a good point, and that was the interesting thing again, is the natural graphite going in with LFP.
Yeah. And there's one thing I was about to mention. I am starting to look into the cold weather performance of LFP. It might be something to do with, because LFP has low energy density, or it tends to have lower energy density. What manufacturers like CATL have been doing is they've been trying to make that cathode more thick and more dense. And what might have happened is they might have pushed that too far. They may have made that cathode, LFP cathode, so thick and so dense that the lithium ions are having difficulty getting in and out of the cathode. If that's the case, and it's just a matter of the way that they've formulated it, and it's not inherent to LFP, then Tesla might be able to make a very persuasive LFP cell, because they've increased the energy density, or will increase the energy density of LFP in other ways, like their cell design and pack level design. But I still need to look into this. Yeah,
you raise an interesting. So I've always raised that thing, because that's my understanding, is that in very cold weather, it has issues, and there's even talk about some discharging when it's standing still. So I saw that released different things about how best to do your charging of your LFP. I saw there was some protocol or what have you, phone master of coin, face east, do this, charge for an hour, do that. But again, people want convenience. So I do think that LFP definitely has a place, and it can price well, and I see applications on it. But as I say, in my mind, I don't think people understand how quickly and how big the US EV market is going to change. And in the end, the US consumer is a little like me. Maybe I should be more resilient or whatever, but I want long range and fast charging. I want the convenience. And I think the upper end market's going to continue to want that. People drive long distances in the US. It's a big country. The charging infrastructure outside of Tesla isn't as developed. So people, they don't want to have to stop twice to go 800 kilometers or whatever. They want to charge once and do it.
Yeah, I think the only thing that's going to limit vehicle range is going to be a shortage of cells due to a shortage of materials. A lot of people are expecting the range of Tesla vehicles to skyrocket in the next few years, but I think they're going to hold back on cells in the mid 2020s and keep the range at, for their most of their consumer vehicles. I think it's going to be around 300. I don't think we're going to see from their mainstream vehicles for 500 miles of range. I think that's going to be for specialty vehicles like the Roadster, Cybertruck, and Model S, because they want to put as many cars on the road as possible, and I think they're going to be limited in terms of raw materials.
An interesting conversation. Jordan, thank you very much for coming on the show. Great to chat to you again. And I look forward to your next deep dive. What is that going to be on?
What's the next one? I think I did, last week's was lithium clay, just from a strategic point of view, why Tesla would want to get into it. And the next video that I'm going to be doing is me taking a wild guess as to what this process might look like. I'm putting myself out there a bit. It's out of my area of expertise and nobody knows what they're actually going to do, but I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out. I found a few synergies and a few processes that might allow for what Tesla is talking about. So thanks for having me. I enjoyed this. It was a really engaging conversation. We could have probably gone on for another hour.